The construction cost overruns for the pipeline that Ottawa bought are jaw-dropping.
The Trans Mountain pipeline is going to cost $3 billion more than the forecast we had seen in May.
Another economic disaster is being brought to Canadians courtesy of the Trudeau government, this time in the form of the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion. The pipeline carries crude and refined products from Edmonton, Alberta to the coast of British Columbia, Canada. An expansion to grow capacity is currently ballooning in cost as excuses stack up from Trudeau and his cabinet. How did this project go up more than 6 times in cost since the government took over? In this video, we're going to take a look at the Trans Mountain pipeline and how it's managed to go so vastly over budget. What impact will this have on Canadian taxpayers? Is there any positive news in all this once the pipeline is functional? First, some brief background. The original Trans Mountain pipeline was constructed in 1953 and remains operational and safe to this day. The expansion project involves twinning the existing 1,150-kilometer pipeline between Strathcona County, near Edmonton, Alberta, and Burnaby, British Columbia. This expansion is being done to increase the system's capacity from approximately 300,000 barrels per day to 890,000 barrels per day, but it's had a lot of stumbling blocks along the way. In June of 2019, the Trudeau government granted approval for the expansion project, including the addition of approximately 980 kilometers of new pipeline. 73% of the route relies on existing right-of-way land rights, with 16% following other linear infrastructure and 11% requiring new right-of-way applications. The government has been making agreements with communities, landowners, stakeholders, and Indigenous communities since 2012. The expansion also includes the integration of 193 kilometers of reactivated pipeline and construction of 12 new pump stations and 19 new tanks across existing storage terminals in Burnaby, British Columbia, Sumas, Washington, and Edmonton, Alberta. Construction of 3 new berths at the West Ridge Marine Terminal in Burnaby, potentially increasing tanker loading to about 34 per month, is also being done. There will also be modification to the existing pipeline to transport refined products, synthetic crude oils, and light crude oils, with the new pipeline designed for heavier oils. To date, approximately 35,118 individuals have been employed by Trans Mountain and its contractors for the expansion project. Why is the Trans Mountain pipeline being expanded? The expansion aims to ensure that Canada receives the best possible value for its oil, benefiting workers, oil producers, and government revenues. Diversification of markets, particularly using the Pacific Tidewater Terminal in Burrard Inlet, which can potentially get Canada better prices compared to just exporting oil to the existing United States Midwest market. With the expansion of oil sands production in Alberta, new markets in the Asia-Pacific region present lucrative opportunities for Canadian energy exports. Key stakeholders involved in the expansion include major oil producers who have committed significant capacities in the pipeline. The expansion of pipelines, including Trans Mountain, is widely considered the safest and most efficient method for transporting petroleum products over long distances on land, ensuring safer, more efficient, and economically viable oil shipment between Alberta and British Columbia. Previous expansions of the Trans Mountain pipeline have occurred since its inception in 1953, with capacity increases undertaken periodically, including projects in 1957, 2006 to 2008, and the Anchor Loop project, which added 160 kilometers of new pipeline between 2004 to 2008. Now we get to the bad news about the Trans Mountain expansion project. The expansion project's costs have skyrocketed from an initial projection of $5.4 billion to a staggering $30.9 billion. One significant reason for this increase is the category of uncapped costs, which means expenditures that are challenging to forecast or are subject to price fluctuations. Examples include the price of legal negotiations with Indigenous groups, rising steel costs, and difficult construction through rugged terrain in British Columbia, which has been much more difficult than expected. While Trans Mountain hasn't provided specific figures for each cost overrun, the company has given 10 main reasons for the higher-than-expected expenditures. These reasons range from increased global inflationary pressures since the pandemic to the challenges associated with building infrastructure in densely populated areas and respecting land rights in cultural areas near Indigenous lands. Serious concerns have arisen regarding the implications implications of these cost overruns, including the possibility of selling off a heavily indebted company and the potential burden on taxpayers. The Trudeau government acquired the pipeline almost 5 years ago with the aim of expanding crude flow from Alberta to Burnaby. They talked about how this project would boost local job markets and generate revenue for the oil sector. The project's current status is not good. Several months ago, January 12, the Canada Energy Regulator, or CER, granted approval for a modification in construction plans for the final segment of the Trans Mountain oil pipeline expansion project. The project has faced significant setbacks, including delays and cost overruns, leading to concerns about its timely completion. The request for the construction alteration stemmed from challenges encountered by Trans Mountain, a Canadian government-owned corporation, during drilling activities in a mountainous region between Hope and Chilliwack in British Columbia. Specifically, unexpected difficulties arose due to the hardness of the rock, prompting the company to seek permission to use smaller diameter pipe for several kilometers of the pipeline's route. After a hearing held in Calgary, Alberta, this decision follows an initial denial of Trans Mountain's request late last year, which led the company to appeal the decision, citing potential significant delays and financial losses. The Trans Mountain expansion project is slated to commence operations by the end of March, but it's unclear if that is actually going to happen at this time. The budget may also go up even further than it already has, which would be even more disastrous. Even worse is that the project is unlikely to even recoup its costs once it's completed. Canada is facing a challenging task in recovering the approximately 35 billion Canadian dollars of taxpayers' money invested in the Trans Mountain oil pipeline. Uncertainties surround shipping limits, and a limited pool of potential buyers complicate the valuation of this strategically valuable asset. That's because the Trudeau government's plan for the pipeline has basically gone bust. It's not just because of the cost overruns, it's also because of the government's plan for what to do with the pipeline. The federal government intends to sell Trans Mountain once the long-awaited expansion is over, but interest from other pipeline operators has been tepid due to elevated financing costs. The pipeline's maximum value, given how much it can ship and projected earnings, is between $15 to $25 billion, leaving Canadian taxpayers on the hook for at least $5 billion and likely more. Various groups, including Indigenous-led initiatives, have expressed interest in bidding for a stake in the pipeline in the past. However, the sharply rising costs and problems have led some potential investors, like Pembina Pipeline Corporation, to reconsider their investment size and some to pull out completely. Notably, major players like Enbridge and TC Energy are not pursuing bids, citing unfavorable market conditions and strategic priorities. The decline in their stock prices and challenging financing environment further limits the pool of potential buyers. Additionally, long-term investors like pension funds are wary of exposure to fossil fuel assets, just as the government is also saying it wants to switch domestically to electric vehicles and away from fossil fuels. It's very mixed messaging, to say the least. The fact is that the majority of the pipeline's long-term value hinges on shipping tolls, which remain unsettled. While long-term contracts cover 80% of the pipeline's capacity, disputes over toll rates persist. Even if regulators favor Trans Mountain's proposed tolls, they may not cover a significant portion of construction costs that are running so wildly over budget. The project is increasingly just not worth it for major players in the energy industry, leaving the golden promises of Trudeau exposed for all to see as foolish and short-sighted. And now taxpayers are on the hook. The icing on the cake of this is that Trudeau is helping to screw over a First Nation in the process of his efforts. These are the same people he claims to respect and value so much, yet the rhetoric flies in the face of reality. Take the Coldwater Indian Band in British Columbia, for example. The Indigenous band is deeply dissatisfied with the pipeline and its long-term history, including the current situation. According to Coldwater Chief Lee Spahan, his people have received inadequate compensation for the extraction of crude oil from their land since the 1950s. Despite a one-time payment received decades ago, Coldwater says that the compensation was minimal and not commensurate with the long-term use of their territory. The sentiment is supported by a 2017 federal court ruling which deemed the original agreement unfair to the Coldwater First Nation. Declassified cabinet documents reveal that while Trans Mountain received substantial tax breaks, Coldwater's compensation was disproportionately low. Spahan notes that such historical injustices persist today under Trudeau, and he wants fair payout from the government and Trans Mountain. Spahan's efforts to seek equitable compensation for his community underscore broader governance issues and challenge Trans Mountain's claims of economic benefits to Indigenous communities. Despite the company's assertions of job creation and training opportunities for First Nations people, Indigenous leaders like Ariel Chekwi Deranger highlight the limited direct benefits and confidentiality surrounding agreements with Trans Mountain. Spahan points out that Canada's reconciliation efforts have fallen short and that Trudeau's pledges to prioritize Indigenous relations aren't coming true at all. While Coldwater has reached a separate compensation agreement for the expansion of the pipeline, Spahan clarifies that this does not address past grievances regarding the original pipeline's construction. In contrast to the confidentiality surrounding agreements with Indigenous communities, non-Indigenous communities and groups have disclosed compensation details, revealing significant payouts received by municipalities along the pipeline route. However, Chief Spahan remains resolute in his pursuit of fair compensation for the past and has invited Trans Mountain CEO Don Farrell and the Prime Minister to address Coldwater's concerns directly. Coldwater's ongoing struggle for fair compensation sheds light on historical injustices and governance challenges in Indigenous resource management. Despite promises of reconciliation, tangible progress remains elusive, emphasizing the need for genuine dialogue and equitable solutions to address past wrongs and build sustainable partnerships. Trudeau's rhetoric is being shown as empty words once again, which Canadians are now very aware of. The bottom line on this pipeline expansion is this. It's true that the project will vastly increase gross output GDP, wages, and tax revenue over the next 20 years. Nevertheless, the delays in this pipeline and its huge cost overruns is currently a big drain on Canada and a national embarrassment, and even includes the need for taxpayer bailouts. The burden of these extra costs should not fall solely on Canadian taxpayers, especially considering the record profits of the oil industry as a whole. There is uncertainty about whether Trans Mountain will be able to repay its debt at all, potentially leading to a write-down of its value if the federal government decides to sell the company. The sale of Trans Mountain poses significant challenges for Canada, with uncertainties over tolls and buyer interest complicating the valuation and potential return on investment. Trudeau has basically put down a big bet in a casino, but he's betting Canada's economy and will get taxpayers to shell the bailout if he loses. It's cynical and deeply corrupt. Maybe Trudeau should start worrying less about trans controversies and gender ideology, and more about the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion being properly completed without such massive cost overruns. If you like this video and want to learn more about what's really going on in Canada, check out this video here. And if this video brought value to you today, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing the video. Thanks for watching.